Hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Community 7 today. I'm Victoria Hill, Public Information Officer for the City of Billings. And if you've been watching, you know that we're featuring a series on public safety updates. We've heard from the fire department, the police department, code enforcement, and today we bring you the city administrator and city attorney, Gina Dahl and Chris Kukulski. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank
Thanks.
you. All right, so let's dive right into the questions. First up, we've heard all about public safety, and people usually think about fire and police when it comes to that topic, but your office is just as much a part of public safety. So tell us, why is it that your department needed the support, extra support from the mill levy?
Well, first, it's really important that the prosecution aspect of public safety be recognized because the prosecution of cases is really essential to the enforcement of city and state laws and to holding offenders accountable. Our office sees a high volume of misdemeanor cases, especially those involving domestic violence, which includes all kinds of things, but mostly what you think of for domestic violence cases are intimate partner or family violence, stalking, sexual assault cases, violations of order of protections, orders of protection, no contact order violation, things like that. The caseloads that this first slide that we have shows our caseloads, and the caseloads are currently such that it has been difficult for the prosecutors to devote adequate time and resources to each individual case. This slide shows that the non-domestic violence prosecutors handled about 1,200 cases each in 2022. That's their average caseload, and the domestic violence prosecutors had an average of 489 cases each. You can see below that's a total of 5,779 cases for the year, and obviously that's divided among 6 prosecutors. That many cases really makes it difficult to devote the amount of time and attention each case deserves. Without adequate resources to prosecute cases, offenders are not held accountable. Law enforcement, which includes police, sheriff, state DCI, highway patrol, whoever, law enforcement, the courts, prosecutors, and defense attorneys are part of the equation too. We all work in tandem to make an efficient and effective criminal justice system. So without one, the system doesn't work. So prosecution really is essential and shouldn't be ignored and needs to be part of the conversation.
Right. And another part of that conversation is the individuals with warrants. Gina's office is seeing them, the county attorney's office is seeing them, and you began collecting some data on that, Chris, at the beginning of last year. So tell us about the number of people the Billings police officers encounter with warrants and your impression on that data.
So as we began working on these levies, one of the things the officers themselves, they were very excited to get more resources to help them with the increasing levels of crime, both felonies and misdemeanors. But one of the concerns they voiced was it is a criminal justice system, and if we don't do something about the incarceration side of the house, it's going to make it tougher for us to do our job. So this is exactly what this points to, is that though we are all in on diversion and helping folks who don't belong in the criminal justice system to stay out of it, the reality is our officers in 2022, 5 times a day on average, interacted with an individual who had a warrant for their arrest. A judge said this individual needs to be brought in, and essentially there was nothing they could do other than encourage that person to show up for their court date. So that's what this data is rounding it at about 2,000 times throughout 2022, 5 times a day, which really just points to the fact that you really need a stick as a part of this, and traditionally that's been the jail, the local county jail. So this is an area we continue to work with the state of Montana on and our partners at the county level to fix this piece of the system.
And the important part about that to mention is if there were room for these individuals with warrants, they might think twice about offending before, if they knew that they would land in jail.
Yeah, there really is a significant, I think, impact on the system. The fact that you really have to get you really have to get to a point where you're involved in a violent crime before you see incarceration immediately. So yeah, we're not. You no longer have that traditional. I made a poor choice. I'm in jail for the night. In the morning, I see the judge and I'm out. That part of the system is truly broken, and so our officers' frustration is, yes, they are dealing with the same individuals over and over. Worse off are the victims, right? More individuals are being victimized, and these individuals aren't being kind of shown the necessity to get on the right path early on. So it has a very significant impact.
Just to add to that, to your point, and the word is out. I mean, people committing crimes know that the jail is full?
In fact, a couple of numbers to back that up. 40% of individuals don't bother showing up for their court appearance on a warrant, or on a notice to appear, which is what they'll get from that officer. They'll give them a notice to appear. 50% of the felons have already committed a felony. So we really, by not having this immediate kind of accountability to the criminal side, is definitely making the system less effective.
Yeah, it's really contributed to an increase in minor crimes that we see, because shopliftings, minor things that people know they're not going to go to jail for are committed with high prevalence.
Yeah, it's certainly not a good position for our city to be in, or for the officers, because they are in fact out there working hard every day, but it's a situation that's out of their hands until it gets fixed from the very top to the bottom. So, all right. And Gina, I wanted to next ask you about the new positions that your office has been able to create because of the mill levy, and where are we at in getting those positions filled? I know it's just the start of the year, but get us all caught up on that.
Yeah, sure. So the mill levy has addressed the shortfall in the city attorney's office by providing some additional resources that we need, not to only to just prosecute, but to also provide better victim services. The mill levy funding will provide for 3 deputy city attorney positions and 4 other positions under the umbrella of other, because they include paralegal, administrative support, and victim witness specialist positions. Obviously, the deputy city attorneys are the prosecutors. Those are the ones who bring the cases to court to be heard before the judge and potentially a jury to obtain convictions to hold people accountable. Those other positions, the victim witness specialist that's the person who provides services to the victims. They guide the victims and witnesses through this court system, which can be really confusing and unfamiliar to people. So they provide services that they can navigate the court system better. The victim witness specialists also provide lots of other additional services to victims and witnesses, which can include crisis counseling, lots of referrals. A lot of victims and witnesses need assistance with housing, income assistance, SNAP. They provide referrals to SNAP, to local shelters, mental health providers, all that kind of stuff. Paralegal and administrative support, obviously, provide the essential administrative support to the office. They get reports from law enforcement. They input data, they create case files. They correspond and work closely with court personnel, defense attorneys. They basically keep the office running and make sure that the prosecutors have everything that they need to prosecute a case. So we had them just listed as 4 because we need to determine the needs after we get all the prosecutors in to decide what the best ratio is to support and services.
And that's just your office alone. Chris, tell us about the growth that municipal court's going to see.
So we will go from one full-time judge to two, so it's doubling the resources there. Now that election, this is an elected position. The judge will be an elected position here in 2023. So the council just went through the process of formalizing, thanks to the voter support, that second court. The position is now created. As we get here into 2023, hopefully we'll have several individuals in our community who will run for that position. And here, a year from now, a second judge will be added, which essentially will double our capacity as far as the court system itself as well. So really has been systematic. Officers on the street, prosecution division, code enforcement, and court all needing to grow because of the caseload growth that we've seen.
Yeah, and that is a lot of cases for one judge to have handled up until this point.
Yep.
All right, so in addition to departments growing, personnel being added on, and staff, what other ways is the mill levy helping out in our community?
So there's a number of, if you think back to the presentations, there really were four strategies or four efforts. You know, violent crime we needed to tackle, our downtown kind of perception, traffic, and then this fourth category fits into what you're asking about, and that is partnerships, the prevention side, diversion programs, things that the city is not exclusively responsible for, but we rely on partners for. So one of those is shelter. So we, 2 mills of the public safety levy was dedicated for crime prevention and ways to reduce the workload on this whole system. A short-term patch for this winter was a $210,000 grant to the Continuum of Care to provide a low-barrier shelter to make sure that folks were not, freezing out on the streets, and ultimately homelessness contributes to these other activities. So that was one area. Crisis response is partnering a city employee, in this case an EMT, a medical professional, with a behavioral health professional. So this is in a relationship with Rimrock, so that when it's not necessary that law enforcement be sent, or maybe even the fire department, but an individual is dealing with a mental health crisis or a substance abuse crisis where safety is really a low concern, then these units will roll to respond to that call and hopefully get that person the help they need, much more directed at them, and then candidly it has a much lower cost to the city. Probably the best example of that is the city over the past decade has kind of tracked, or our community, the most recent analysis, roughly 100 individuals were costing the community about $10 million in services between first responders, the emergency rooms, and other services in the community. So that other $250,000 investment is really to try to lower that cost and get better services out in that way.
And another idea on the horizon is this nurse-family partnership. Tell us about that. What is it, and how will that have an impact on the city?
So it really opens the conversation about crime prevention. So much about what we're talking about is responding to a need. When we started rolling up our sleeves and talking about crime prevention, learned about this program that's been going on for a decade in Yellowstone County, over 4 decades across the country. It couples a nurse, it partners a nurse with an expecting mother, and that nurse works with that mom and that family until that child reaches the age of 2. It's called Nurse Family Partnership, is one of the home visit programs that exist here in Billings. When we have 2.5 people doing that through Riverstone Health. When you look at the data for both Yellowstone County and nationally, all the things move in the right direction. That mom stays out of the criminal justice system, in the workforce, and is available, raising the child. Both the mom and dad tend to stay out of the criminal justice system. The kid ends up in kindergarten and school, being more school ready. And one of the immediate effects we found in Yellowstone County is there's 62% less domestic violence in the home in this. So we're looking at, as a catalyst, maybe doubling that program from 2.5 nurses to 5 with some of this prevention money and the money we're getting now from the sale of marijuana, which we could use as a catalyst to show the community this really is a very wise investment, and we need to figure out how to get to the 12 to 15 nurses that we need to meet the needs of Billings.
And it might be hard for maybe folks watching at home who didn't have to deal with these situations growing up, but you know, domestic violence, a incarcerated parent is very much a part of a cycle for some families, and that is just the norm. So this would help those families break that cycle.
That is the goal, like with a conversation, I don't know whether we'll have time for, of a family justice center. There's a lot of work going on with our partners in the community to understand true crime prevention efforts, determine which ones we're going to invest more heavily into. Many have been doing this for years, but truly our crime numbers have just moved to a point where this needs to become a very open conversation with our whole community, and decisions need to be made at how best to get ourselves out of this. It took us a decade plus to get here. It's going to take us many years to get where we ultimately want to be.
Yeah, nothing like that happens overnight. Gina, something Chris mentioned was domestic violence. That's a pretty significant part of the job for your prosecutors in your office. Give us an idea of how many cases you guys are dealing with and what that workload's like for them.
Sure. Also, just to transition from what Chris was talking about with the nurse-family partnership, that's really exciting, and I really hope that expands, because if that could bring down our numbers in domestic violence, that would be great, because our office does see a significant amount of domestic violence cases. We have a domestic violence unit, so we have an entire team of, right now it's 5 people devoted solely to, well, 6 actually, including the admin support, but 6 people devoted solely to prosecuting domestic violence cases. Those kinds of cases comprise about anywhere from 15 to 20, 25, 23 in peak years % of the total cases that we see. In 2022, we received a little under 1,000 cases. So you can see from the slide, we received about 978 cases of partner family violence type cases that were requested for prosecution in our office. We currently have 2 prosecutors dedicated to these cases, and we are currently searching for a 3rd prosecutor. You asked earlier about the progress, and we have hired 1 additional victim witness specialist to assist with these cases, and we are currently looking for a 3rd prosecutor to fill out that domestic violence unit. The domestic violence cases are generally more complex and take more time and resources to prosecute than the other type of traffic cases or thefts or the other general misdemeanor cases that our office sees and handles in municipal court. That's why when you look at the slide showing the cases per prosecutor, I don't know if we can go back to that first slide for a second, but you see that in that first slide that the domestic violence prosecutors handle a caseload that is less than the non-domestic violence prosecutors. We strive for about a 2-to-1 ratio, that for every 1 domestic violence case that a prosecutor handles, the non-domestic violence prosecutors handle about 2. The current ratio is more like 2.5 to the 1, and frankly, this caseload is just still a bit high for the prosecutors to handle. As an example, well, if we go back to the other slide now, sorry about that. I've broken down the domestic violence cases to show how many cases our office has received, which we talked about, that was 978, and actually filed, which is 483. So we're a little under 50% that's showing the capacity of our prosecutors to get these cases actually prosecuted. You look back at 2021, I feel like I need to point out that that looks like a really great number. It's an anomaly that is explained by the fact that we hired an additional prosecutor, and before he actually started prosecuting cases full time, he worked on our backlog. So he just solely worked on charging cases to try to get us caught up a little bit. So it looks like a really great number, but that 49% is actually more in line to where we've been, and we're trying to continue to increase. So once we get a third prosecutor, that will bring our number up more positively, and we'll have a better capacity to address that shortfall.
You know, I think when we were talking about the public safety levies in the community, this was an area that people, frankly, were most astonished by. I think we all recognize and would expect when there is a case, and it's determined that that case is legitimate, that absolutely it would be filed, that victim would get the support they need, and so, you know, Gina, her team, her staff, goal to absolutely get back to when our caseload unfortunately was half the size that it is today, and they're making great progress in that regard. But that's one set of numbers that I found with the hundreds of people we talked to in the community, that they had the strongest kind of maybe visceral reaction, like, yes, we have to fix this. This is not acceptable.
Yeah. And let's turn now into something that's actually happening right now in Helena, the 2023 legislative session. So the folks watching at home are hearing about these issues. Is there anything that we should be paying attention to that could maybe help the city, and, you know, we could reach out to these lawmakers and convince them to make a decision that will help the city and not hurt the city?
Absolutely. So in the broadest sense, and generally I feel pretty good about this, which is our legislators undeniably seeing that crime is an issue, and as we keep talking about, it really is a system, and the state is as intimately involved in this system's effectiveness as our county is and as we are. So there are a number of bills out there. I'll rattle some of them off, but in general terms, I would say to our citizens, just frankly, the encouragement that the legislators who represent them, that they communicate with them of the expectation that they are doing whatever they can do to help us tackle this problem. So a few bills or topics out there, and I'm sorry, the kind of shotgun. So one is around sober living facilities. So we're very grateful. Our community for many decades has provided services to help individuals who are ready to help themselves move on from their addictions. We have between 37 and 40 sober living houses in Billings. We're a very low regulated state, and so this bill, Senate Bill 94, will require that those facilities really meet best practices, that they're certified by the entities nationally that look out for the best interest of the individuals who are in recovery, how those homes operate, how those people get services. So Senate Bill 94 is one we're supporting. Senate Bill 90, several Senate Bill 95, Senate Bill 89, and Senate Bill 19 are all around making improvements in what was known as the Criminal Reinvestment Act of 2017. But we have seen that a number of those well-intentioned laws from 2017 have really backfired in our community. Something as simple as theft in stores, the limits being so high that individuals know that they can steal, $400, less than $500 worth of things, and the ability for us to hold them accountable is greatly reduced. So there's a whole series of bills out there that the city attorney's office, the county attorney's office, and we've been working with our legislators to fix. Maybe the last one I'd throw out is House Bill 174. Really goes back to our jail issue. The state of Montana says and does that it pays county jails $69, there's $70 a night for someone who's staying in that jail under state charges. Well, it cost our jail a little over $100 a night.
Interesting.
So we as taxpayers here in Yellowstone County are underwriting that cost for each and every individual that's in the jail. That's making it tougher for the county to deal with its challenges. So House Bill 174 will require that they reimburse the counties at the actual cost, not just at a predetermined number. So
Just some of them to keep an
just
eye
some
on.
of them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 4,400 bills
Ooh, yeah.
at the moment.
Right.
Part of why I would just frankly emphasize, unless somebody really wants to get into the weeds and the detail, just this general emphasis of how important it is that our representatives are engaged in improving safety in our community to help our victims and frankly to help our economy long term.
right.
Eventually our community will not be a thriving, growing city if crime becomes our reputation.
This is one of the ways we can stand up and stop it.
Absolutely.
Right. And Gina, is there any legislation that maybe you're paying close attention to? And we're getting close to our time limit here. We're down to almost 2 minutes. But so is there anything you are paying attention to?
Yes, actually, there are a lot of bills we're keeping an eye on. As Chris said, that there are 4,400 bill draft requests out there right now. So many of them don't actually have bills drafted, but they're entitled a bill generally to revise criminal laws or criminal procedure or the court system or victim services. So we're keeping an eye on all of those and waiting for bill drafts to see if there are any that we need to support or oppose, take an active position on. Right now, of the bills that have been drafted, there are several that we are actually watching. Chris mentioned the Silver Living Home bill, which is doesn't necessarily relate to what we do in municipal court work, but that is prosecuting. But we're interested in that bill because it is going to place minimal requirements on recovery residences. Billings has seen the significant increase in those homes in the past several years, and not all those facilities are run the same. Some are good and some aren't so good, and some exploit their residents, and those residents don't have the protections of the Landlord-Tenant Act. So that's an important bill, as are many others that Chris mentioned that are reinstating jail time to kind of reverse the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Act of 2017. So we're watching a lot of them, but many of them don't have bill drafts yet. So it's early. It's a bit early.
Yeah, and you are literally watching. I walked in your office and you were watching
Yes.
C-SPAN the other day. So you're
I am
literally watching.
constantly watching all day long. Yes.
Well, I thank the both of you for taking the time to follow up on this topic. Lots of people heard about the public safety mill levy, gave it the support and passed it, but now to see this in action, and this is really just the beginning. And so we thank everyone at home.
Yes, we thank them for their support, and I would just ask, right, all 120,000 residents, their eyes and ears, they see something, say something.
important there.
We never want to get to a point where our community just kind of throws in the towel. We need all of their assistance in order to make our community a safe place.
All right. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much, Chris and Gina. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.